Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for our program, A Discussion with Chicago's New Directors. I'm Ellen Keith. I'm the Chicago Collections Consortium Board Chair and the Director of Research and Access and Chief Librarian at the Chicago History Museum. For those of you who are new to our audience tonight, Chicago Collections Consortium is a consortium of libraries, museums, and cultural organizations, all working together for the preservation and promotion of Chicago's history and culture. We share our collections through our Explore portal, which provides free and open access to members' archival collections. We would like to begin our program with Chicago Collections Land Acknowledgement Statement. And that's going to come on. Chicago Collections Consortium acknowledges and is grateful for the Native peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse Indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. When you visit our member organizations and when you experience Chicago's outdoor spaces, we invite you to join in offering respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous peoples that reside in the Chicagoland region, as well as their ancestors. We are proud to host tonight's event in partnership with the Black Metropolis Research Consortium. The Black Metropolis Research Consortium, or BMRC, is also a Chicago-based membership association of libraries, universities, museums, community arts organizations, and other archival institutions. The BMRC's mission is to connect all who seek to document, share, understand, and preserve Black experiences. Please check out CCC's and BMRC's websites and portals for more information. And in celebration of our 10th anniversary year, we are excited to invite you back virtually on November 15th for a noontime conversation with Library of Congress librarian Dr. Carla Hayden. Registration information can be found on CCC's website under our events tab. If you are unable to make it, it will also be recorded. Wonderful. And here we go. Tonight, I am honored to be speaking with Chicago's new directors. We have Robin Hofstetter, Director of Libraries, Roosevelt University, Torsten Reimer, University Librarian and Dean of the University of Chicago Library, Michelle Boule-Smith, Director of Library Services at North Central College, Xuemao Wang, Charles Deering McCormick University Librarian and Dean of Libraries at Northwestern University. And I know our time tonight is going to go by quickly, so we're going to get started. And a reminder to our listeners that we hope to save time for questions at the end of our discussion, and they can be directed to the Q&A. So we're going to begin. So I'm just going to do a round robin. I'm going to start with Michelle, and I'm going to ask, you'll all have the same question, and I'll call you out, but starting with Michelle, you have each joined your organizations fairly recently. Talk to us about what aspects of their missions attracted you.
Great, thanks for having me. My last name is Boule-Smith. It's got it's fine, it gets mispronounced all the time. I was attracted to North Central for multiple reasons. Some of you may know that they have recently endeavored to completely renovate their library and turn it into a learning commons. So I was very attracted to the idea of being able to be on a campus that really was investing in the library as a collaborative, creative space that was bringing multiple resources into one area for students. So we also have, many of the academic supports are also in my building as well. So it really has become a hub on the north side of campus. So there was that. North Central also has a really holistic approach to education. So it's not just what happens in the classroom, but what happens out of the classroom and how all of those things work together to create hopefully good citizens as they go out into the world. And the last piece that was really important to me was they really are committed to DEI on this campus and have continued to build on some initiatives that they have started over the last few years and want to keep moving forward. So I've been in places where it's just lip service, but it seems like they really are active. So, and being near Chicago, I won't lie, was a nice draw. So
it sounds like an exciting time to be at North Central. And it's a beautiful campus too. I've been there. I'm going to turn it over next to Xuemao. Same question. What attracted you to Northwestern?
Thank you, Anna. Attract me to the Northwestern, I would say both personally and professionally, starting with professionally. Before joining Northwestern, I worked for the University of Cincinnati as the Dean of Library and the Vice Provost for Digital Scholarship for 10 years. So for a decade, you can accomplish quite a lot. And also for the decade now, it's time for the change. So the Northwestern is the university with the research power, like the university before the Cincinnati I work for, Emory and Johns Hopkins. And then that's where you and I overlap. So I want to go back to this kind of the research power research university environment. And library-wise, and the Northwestern certainly has more resource than the Cincinnati. So that's a professional reason. Personally, my son and has the young family live in the city of Chicago. So being closer to my son's family, and recently they have the young baby, we become the grandparent. So it's quite good for the life in this stage. So that's primary reason attracted me to the Northwestern.
Xuemao and I have known each other for about 20 years. So congratulations on being a grandfather. I would never have guessed.
Yeah.
Robin, same question, the attraction to Roosevelt.
Thanks, Ellen. So Roosevelt University is a very small private college. We have about 4,000 students, and we have a long history of social justice. I previously worked here. I was head of technical services many years ago. And I recently returned after venturing out to some other organizations. I came back, so I was very familiar with Roosevelt and the library. The Murray Green Library is our main library. That's where I am now. This is my office. It's on the 10th floor of the auditorium building, which is at 430 South Michigan Avenue. Our library, Murray Green, is named after Philip Murray and William Green, and these are past presidents of the AFL-CIO. These were labor leaders on the university's initial board of advisors, which is just super cool. And aside from the library, the university itself has stood for social justice since its founding in 1945. And Roosevelt just has an inspiring spirit. And from the moment that I walked in here, I felt welcome and I felt celebrated for the person that I am. And I want to pass that along, that experience, to the students and the faculty through our library services. And I'm really happy to be here at Roosevelt. It's a great opportunity.
And Dr. Hayden is a graduate of Roosevelt, so you better believe I'll be asking her about that.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, please do. That would be so exciting.
Torsten, same question. University of Chicago in beautiful Hyde Park.
Yeah, so my story, I think, is relatively similar. And I think there was quite a lot of what Xuemao said that sort of links to my journey. Also, I've worked at a lot of universities that had a strong focus on sort of research and that drive to sort of change the world through research. I studied and worked at the University of Munich in Germany, and then worked at both King's College and Imperial College in London. But in my case, it's somewhat different, because instead of becoming a grandfather, I just became a father about a year ago. In fact, about 6 hours after the provost offered me the job in Chicago, we found ourselves in hospital. And so for us, it was not just sort of moving within the US. And we've really, I think, as a family, thought a lot in the pandemic about what do we want the next stage of our life to be. And we sort of kept coming back to wanting to live in the US. And we had this sort of checklist where we said, well, we want a place that's vibrant culturally, intellectually, is inviting to newcomers. I think as an immigrant coming into a country, you notice that difference. And also, crucially, a city where you can live without a car. Having never had a car in my life. In fact, I don't even have a driving license. I'm a pedestrian and cyclist. And so there are already not that many American cities that have that environment, and then also have a university that has such a strong focus on research. But I mean, ultimately, what really attracted me is a lot about the library here, because the Library at the University of Chicago has very strong foundations. I mean, some terrific and impressive buildings, and very strong, really interesting collections. But it's also, I think, like quite a few libraries, gone through a difficult few years. I think we all probably have struggled with funding cuts on many levels, and trying to sort of reposition our services in a new and more digital environment. And the pandemic has had an effect on our library. And I think what I've sort of seen here is a library that had a really difficult time. We currently have more than 50 vacancies, for example, and going through a pandemic with so many vacancies has been even more stressful for colleagues who had to cover, in some cases, 1 or 2 jobs. And so at this point, I think what I've seen at the University of Chicago is a realization after my predecessor retired, that maybe it's time for a bit of a rethink, and also maybe a sort of watershed moment where the university with its ambitions feels it needs to invest more in the library. And that to me struck me as a terrific opportunity to come in, having a library that has so much strength to build on, but also quite a few areas where it needs rebuilding or rethinking. And that in particular, and that's probably my last point, was attractive to me. I spent the last 5 or 6 years at the British Library in London, where my focus really was on rethinking the National Library as a research library in a digital world. And what I've seen here is there was a lot of interest on campus to have the discussion and say, well, what could this library be like in 5, 10, or 15 years? And I think we are in a somewhat challenging position right now, but also in a really great position to now lay the foundations for the next decade or longer. And crucially, I think that in the new environment that we work in, it's important for libraries, archives, and museums to be even more collaborative and think more about shared services and working together. And I think that links also really nicely in the topic of today.
It does. And it's so interesting. I'm hearing from the 4 of you, not only, a desire to be where you are because of what it offers to your communities, but also that, what we've talked about, what's really been so striking the last several years, couple years of the pandemic is, that work-life balance, being in a community that's supportive to you and good for your family and something that nourishes you. So that is wonderful. My next question, and I'm going to start with Robin this time. So Robin, regarding leadership, what is your philosophy of leadership and how have you been able to address it during the last challenging few years?
Okay, so my philosophy is creativity and flexibility applied to transformation. And what I mean by that is I recently learned about this idea called both and thinking, and it's different from my default and many of our culture default of either or thinking. And one thing I've learned over my career is that we're really terrible at predicting the future. And so how do we make decisions then if that's the case, if we're bad at predicting what's going to happen? And I think it's good to think creatively and then allow for flexibility within a structure of within a financial structure, meaning that we are fiscally responsible because, as Torsten mentioned, we're maybe headed toward a recession. I don't know, but fiscal responsibility is going to be paramount for us. And then just thinking creatively, we have to remain flexible and work toward our goals, but we don't really know, we can't really predict what's going to happen. So if we stay within those structural bounds, think fiscally responsibly, and then change and adapt, I think then we have a key to the path forward, whatever that looks like.
We've really been challenged to be flexible and creative, haven't we? Xuemao, I'll shoot that over to you, your philosophy of leadership.
That's a good question, big question. I feel, go back to the interview again. So in summary, I would say I truly believe whatever I do, whatever I need or participate, I strive for the excellence. I want the organization to be the leader in the field we participate, right? The second one is I want to create the opportunity in this journey of the pursuing the excellence for everyone in the organization to reach the greatest potential. So that's the other thing I care so much. The third one is I try to live with my own words. I believe living by example. That is something I look at myself seriously and try to live up with that promise. So that's pretty much the small summary about the philosophy about the leadership.
Thank you. And Torsten, over to you.
Well, I think sort of Xuemao has actually captured some of the things that I wanted to say, but so maybe give a slightly different perspective on the same thing. I feel really crucial element to achieve some of the things that I think both Robin and Xuemao have spoken about is, for me, is communication. I truly believe that we might all have terrific ideas, and I would expect them. We all have had sort of really varied and interesting careers. But however good our ideas as leaders might be, they'll get better when we expose them to others. And not only when we sort of say, well, here's my idea, what do you make of it? And then also accept it if someone says, I think it's rubbish, I think there's a better idea, that we are willing to listen and have that discussion. And I'm really precious about doing the best work that I can, but I'm not necessarily precious of having to follow my idea. And therefore, I think in particular, in the bigger the organization is, if the communication doesn't work, then you also feel that there's a sort of loss of trust. That negatively affects morale, it affects culture, and then you also end up setting, I think, a bad example at that point. If the organization loses trust in you as a leader, it's much harder for, say, the people who report to you, who are leaders in their own right, to do that. If they are questioning, well, this is great if I can talk to my AUL, but what about this odd university librarian who doesn't really seem to want to engage? So for me, I think that's really important. And that also means that you need to be willing to have dialogue. I mean, it's not always possible. Sometimes you just have to say, I'm really sorry, we can't discuss every single aspect of what we work. But in principle, I think as a leader, you need to be, certainly I want to be open to it. That means you should then also strive to be sort of clear in what you want and describe the problems that you're facing. I think if you're not honest and clear in describing the problems, then how do you expect others to come up with solutions? Or if you put a solution forward, to understand why the solution could really be good. And that in the end, then I think it creates trust. And going back to the question of the last challenging few years, I had, in my own experience of the pandemic, I think like quite a few people, I also caught COVID, and I caught it in March 2020. And I didn't catch a particularly light case. I mean, I came out of COVID, it was a bit like a flu. After 2 weeks, I went back to work, and then it came back again and came back again. And so I've sort of over months started sort of dragging myself into work and trying to sort of persist as much as possible. And then I realized in the end that I wasn't doing myself any good, and I then decided to step away and just did not work for 2 whole months, and mostly spent them on the sofa cuddling the cat. And one thing that I was really pleased to see is how everyone in the team stood up, because they knew that I trusted them to make whatever decisions just needed to be made. And also everyone else in the wider department that I was overseeing knew that my leadership team had my trust. And so when I came back and saw that actually things had gone reasonably well without me, and that's given me the time to really catch my breath and recover. And it's also, I think, been a really good reminder that before we are staff as an organization, we are people. And I think if we want to get the best of our staff for the organization that we serve, then we need to recognize that sometimes we just need to give people the breath, the sort of space to catch their breath, whether it's mental health or physical health, or as in the case of suffering from long COVID, it's both. And that to me, I think, has been a really important experience. And it's sometimes easy to forget that this pandemic is still out there, and that even without that pandemic, there are other health challenges. And I think in many libraries where I see people feel sort of exhausted, a bit burned out, I think that's another crucial responsibility, that we need to not just push for the best result, but also push for the best result that we can achieve sustainably in our organizations.
Absolutely. And I agree in terms of, we are not, I have a small staff here, and in days past, we have powered through like, bad colds, sore throats, and we've come in because we know we're so small, and now we're like, nope, stay home, feel better, nothing is an emergency, nope. Michelle, same question to you, philosophy of leadership.
I really like what Torsten said. I'm going to start with what I was going to say at the end, which is I really do encourage my staff to have boundaries at work. And I think, Ellen, your comment that we all made, we all touched on things about our personal lives that made these jobs appealing to us. And I think our mental health and happiness really has become something that we are more grounded in. And I try to encourage that in my staff. So that's what I was going to say at the end. So what I was going to say at the beginning, I really do feel like transparent collaboration is one of the most important things that I can do and be as a leader. It's kind of like what Torsten was talking about, that communication piece. I try to tell my staff as much as I can about all the things that I can. There are some things that we can't, of course, share with them, but when we're facing a problem or we need to just hash out something, I try to do it with all of my staff. I don't have a huge staff either. There's about 10 of us and we meet, regularly. But I have found that putting that trust in my people and being able to have those discussions about what's going on in our daily work, what's going on in our future work, and giving them the whole picture of what our library is facing, as Torsten was saying, again, really well, that it should never be just my ideas at the table. I have a staff who I trust and I care about, and they're smart and they're very good at their jobs. Some of them have been librarians for longer than I have. And so it's important for me to, acknowledge that, that experience and that knowledge around me. And so I rely on that. And I do think that when you give that transparency, it does build trust. And then when things happen and you need to ask them to follow a decision that you have to make where you can't have that conversation, then you already have that trust and they are more willing to follow you after that. So those are probably the two most important things. Secondary to those two things, transparency and collaboration is always improving. So always looking at what we're doing and with the mindset that we can improve on this next time. Even if we knocked it out of the park, what can we do differently next time that could reach a different student or a different faculty group or a different part of our community? And is there something that we could do to be more equitable in how we, do this service? So for me, that's also taking time at the end of every semester to have a conversation with my staff. What did we do well? What can we do better next time? And again, having that collaborative conversation about, improvement as well as just what's going on is really important to me.
Thank you. Okay, our third question, and I'm going to start with Xuemao this time. Would you talk to us about how you're addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in your library?
It's a good question. This is my third month. I come in, over the interview, I actually noticed the Northwestern Library already done quite of the work in terms of DE&I. We call it DEI and A for accessibility. There is the established structure and committee, chief of the D&A person, and all in the place. And the organization actually has I believe it's the 3 years of the strategic plan, particularly strategic plan for the DEIA, right? So once I come in, I'm starting to study the plan. My vision is I'm going to take that plan as one of the guiding document and look at the university new situation. We have the new president of the Northwestern, who is actually newer than me, 2 weeks newer than me. So look at the new direction under the new leadership and engage the campus for how the campus-wide feel about our D&A strategic plan, and also look at it internally to learn what are the challenges for the implementation so far. So I can provide continued support, whether it's the leadership structure, whether it's the policy, whether it's the, the hiring process, whether it's the compensation structure, wherever we can really live up some of the principles has been developed with the D&A plan. So that's very much I'm in the situation now. So that's where the Northwestern are. And from my previous job, we, as the public university in Cincinnati, we are also very much emphasized on the DE&I. For example, in Cincinnati, and when we recruiting the position, any position, particularly professional leadership position, when we recruiting position, there is the required process for the people, the candidate needs to submit the DE&I statement. I'm not sure Northwestern is doing that yet. I could be wrong. I have not engaged deeply about the hiring process here. But that's something I feel might be the direction for us to thinking about. And certainly in Cincinnati, I'm quite sure Northwestern is doing something similar. And when we form the search committee, there is the guidance and oversight from the university DE&I office about the formation of the search committee to ensure the diverse point of view and representation. And there is the gatekeeper process in the university about how the candidate pool has been formed, whether it's the diverse, meet some of the criteria of the diversity. So those are the things I can share with you. Again, I'm still very new, and I can only share much what I learned so far.
Thank you. Torsten, same question.
Yeah, I've been here a few months longer now than Xuemao has, but I recognized when I come here that I would be coming into a part of Chicago that I think has probably in many ways sort of seen the effects of, say, systematic racism more than certainly anywhere else that I've lived. I mean, the UK, for example, has its challenges of racism too, but say growing up in London, I always felt I was in an environment where diversity was valued and was sort of almost the core of what the city was. And where in the neighborhood where we lived, there were Hasidic Jews, quite a few, in fact, one of the largest populations in Europe, but there's also a large Muslim population. They all lived close together, and in fact, often on the same streets. And so it's a very different form of diversity than what I've experienced here, and still seeing how much of Hyde Park, well, how much of Chicago really broadly is a much more segregated environment. So I think first of all, coming here, there was an awareness that there's lots that I need to learn. And this goes back to the point earlier about listening. But I also noted in engaging with the library that actually quite a few of the challenges that we struggle here are in many ways very similar to the challenges that we, for example, struggled with the British Library. I mean, the context is different. In the British Library, in the UK context, there's much to say about the history of empire, in particular important for a library as large as the British Library, with collections that often have come together during the period of empire. And it's maybe a different, say, mix of backgrounds and races that you find in London, but many of the challenges are the same. And I should also obviously very clearly say, even though I think race probably will be on most of our minds when we talk about DE&I, diversity is much more broader and affects us really on all levels. But what struck me then, looking at the library also, is something that's maybe sometimes missed. I think I still often encounter this view that you do DE&I just for minority groups on your staff. And before I came to the library, a group of consultants came in who specialized on the area, and they interviewed every single member of staff, and they wrote a report and said, these are the challenges that we are facing, and this is what staff wants to see. It's a really good report. But in looking through this, what struck me is that most of the things that are in there really have nothing to do with gender or with race or age. They are in fact in many ways linked to what I believe is just good management practice. So there were concerns raised about challenges of communication, about processes that aren't clear, about question about participation in the organization, professional development, and so on. Now, these would, for example, affect people of color in different and often worse ways than they might say, accept people like me. But it's also become very clear to me looking through the report, a lot of what we need to do will really benefit everyone across the organization. And because I think that's sometimes still forgotten in a discussion, I'll make it a point to highlight that DE&I is not just something that you do for minority staff. You do this because it creates a better environment for everyone. I think that's an important realization. And I also think if you want to be successful, you can't just do this top down and you can't just do it bottom up. You need to come at it from both ways. So we've started to implement a range of the recommendations. For example, when I joined, we had a fairly small leadership team that didn't reflect the diversity of the organization. We now have a larger team, that's a leadership team that's much more diverse, that's also operating in a different way. Before I started, the library has set up a DE&I team, and that's really not driven by leadership. It's members of staff who come together, make suggestions and give advice. I'm not looking for them to do the work, but to be sort of critical friends on helping us to sort of shape what we do. And then I think at the moment, in many ways, we are working our way through what's in the report and what I've also learned during my listening session about improving communications, making the start on improving professional development, addressing things such as pay equity. I mean, that's not easily done and not quickly, but we have already in a few cases been able to do this, and we're also looking at some sort of more system-wide changes. But a lot of it, I think, has to do with listening to everyone, engaging with the issues that they face, and then not expecting necessarily staff to fix the issues, but it's something that leadership and staff need to fix together.
Thank you. I'm taking all of that in. It's and I'm so glad this is recorded so I can listen again. Michelle, over to you.
So one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about why I wanted to come to North Central was because they were bringing a lot of services into the library for a learning commons. So one of the services that is now here in the library is student success services. And student success includes our advisors, but they also include our ADA staff who do ADA accommodations and work with those students. And they also do a lot of, I would call it counseling, but they do a lot of scaffolding and support for our students. And the testing center is also in the library. So for us, when I think about DEI, instead of my mind mostly going to collections and displays, which is what my previous library focused on a lot for different reasons, that's where that campus was at. But here we're able to think about DEI in a way that supports students, which I really appreciate. So anytime we are going to do a display, or we think about furniture or rooms, or how we're doing like a classroom setup and activities, we think about how accessible is it, and are we going to be able to modify this for different kinds of students, and can we work with different modalities? And so we are having those kind of conversations, and for me that's very exciting. And there's also an opportunity to collaborate with the student success team to do even more and maybe participate in some initiatives and doing some workshops and stuff for faculty to encourage them in their curriculum and their teaching as well, which is really exciting. One of the other things that, because they renovated the entire building on the inside, all of our spaces are very different. So we have 10 study rooms now, and every study room has a different setup. So some of them have both a standing and a sitting desk. Some of them have more of a couch setup. Every room has a TV that has, closed caption capabilities and all of those things. So regardless of what a student's needs are, they can find a place to be comfortable and study and collaborate with their group, or they might just need to go into one of our sound dampening pods if they have auditory issues and go be alone and study in a very quiet space. So there's a lot for students to offer here. I also have an outreach and liaison coordinator. Sorry, she's the head of liaison and outreach services. And she has been really working hard to create inroads and collaborations with, we have an Office of Multicultural Affairs on our campus, and they're, in most cases for non-academic DEI work, they're the group on campus that spearheads a lot of things. So we've been partnering with them to do displays and programs, and we've been hosting them in the library. So some of our DEI work as a library staff is providing a safe and inviting space to start having some of these programs, which the library was never able to do before. And most of the programming happened on the other side of campus. Our campus is not that big, but the students act like it's like, you know, Antarctica, and, you know, so it's only 10 blocks long, but we're on the other side from where like the rec center is and all of those things. So there wasn't a lot of programming happening here, but there are dorms here. So we've also become a place where some of that stuff can happen on this side of campus. So that has actually also been really nice. I think I had something else, but I didn't write it down. So I think that's what I got.
I am definitely inviting myself to visit your library. Robin, over to you.
So we have several projects here that we're really excited about. We're laying the groundwork to support the students with OER, open educational resources. And this is big and trending, and we are, you know, on board with it. We've had faculty come and ask how we can support their publishing. So that's going to be part of it. We're creating a faculty committee to get the OER movement going at Roosevelt, and what that can do is make it more affordable and more accessible and this will benefit everybody in the institution, you know, faculty and students. So that's one thing that we're really excited about. We're going to be holding some workshops later, maybe next semester and into next fall. And then Roosevelt has a Hispanic serving institution designation because we have 25% Hispanic students. So we have just opened up a Hispanic serving institution STEM center, just opened 2 weeks ago. So that's really exciting. And the library is supporting that with collections, collection development. And then lastly, we're dedicated to accessibility by making our online catalog, website, and computers on campus more accessible because as everyone else mentioned, you know, the more user-friendly and more accessible our services are for those students with disabilities is more accessible for all the other students and faculty on campus as well. So we have a web. So the library here at Roosevelt, we're actually not under the academic side. We are under the IT department. My manager is the CIO, the Chief Information Officer of the university. And so we have a web content committee, and we're constantly reviewing and going over what accessibility means and why it's important, how you can check it, because accessibility can be very confusing for those who are not familiar with, you know, what it looks like on the web and what a screen reader does and what that looks like. So we've had some demonstrations of that. And so, yeah, our commitment to accessibility is growing as web services change and evolve and as our catalog evolves. So we have some exciting things going on here.
Oh, that sounds great. And we all know how challenging some library web pages can be. So this is really great. So this is going to be our last question before we open it up to questions from our attendees. And I'm going to start off with Torsten this time and ask, how do each of you in your role as a director hope to leverage the power of your membership in consortiums like CCC and BMRC? You've got Jeannie and Marcia here, so you know, tell us how we can help you.
Well, I think in sort of abstract terms, I think the reason why I'm really glad that we are part of these networks is because I believe they're a way to do more than we could do by ourselves. I mean, that goes obviously for quite a few networks, and we're lucky that we are part in several networks, both sort of locally, but also nationally and internationally. I think that's really important. But I'll maybe sort of pick up one aspect that I'm particularly interested in, and that links to collaborations that we can do in the digital space. And we, I think this goes for Chicago Collections and the BMRC, we are all sort of stewards and guardians of, I think, parts of the cultural heritage of Chicagoland. But no one really has, even probably for one particular area, everything. So from a user perspective, what we currently do is actually sort of frustrating because you need to go through this organization and that organization and back and forth. And digitization obviously opens up the opportunity for us to bring these things together without having to sort of uproot them to where they historically landed. And so I think one of the sort of potentials I would really like to explore and to focus on as much as possible to see how can we sort of jointly coordinate our activities in digitization, find material that's really useful for users, and then find good ways of integrating it and bringing it together. I think that works both really nicely from the perspective of an individual user, but the more we can make this material available at scale and in ways that are also then open to be researched at scale, the more we can open up interesting approaches to digital scholarship and sort of more big data type approaches that maybe allow us to do things with collections that you haven't done before. And I mean, one area that I'm particularly excited, not just because we have a good maps collection, others, but I think maps and geographical information is one really exciting way of doing this, because it's terrific of pulling information together, and it does this in a very intuitive way, where everyone who isn't a specialist, I think we'll all have seen that of Chicago, we're all used to, say, zooming in on Google Maps or whatever it is, and then finding information and then looking at sort of what can I find out about this particular space. And then you can bring the temporal dimension in. That then becomes a bit more ambitious. And you can then also try to sort of build semantic links between the content that we have. And that's something that none of us can do by ourselves. It's something that I think is attractive for funding organizations because they want to see collaboration. They want to see not just digitization for its own sake, but for opening up that potential. And I think crucially also, they want to see the investments that they make to have more impact, not just in academia, but also beyond. And I think this is a terrific way for an organization, say, like mine, that's generally probably been perceived as sort of closed doors, not letting the public in, to say, we actually have exciting things that we hold on behalf of everyone. And this is then one way of really opening it up to everyone. And that's something that we can only do through these collaborations. I mean, there's a lot more that we can do around skills, around working on community engagement, sharing best practice, perhaps also in some cases sharing facilities. And these are all important and I care about them, but because of having worked for a while as a digital scholar before I came into libraries, I think that's probably what's most close to my heart.
And I'm very excited. CHM is part of a grant that U of C spearheaded along an EH grant that Cecilia Smith at U of C wrote and included CHM in the Newberry, Mapping Chicagoland. And this is going to be, we're going to be able to promote it through Explore, et cetera, and BMRC. We're very excited about that. So yes, I agree. Michelle, to you.
I'm new to the area since May, and so I'm still learning what all of the organizations do, but I do believe that no library is an island, and we can't exist without each other and be successful. So I also think professionally that it's our job to invest in our local organizations, and because that invests in all of our people and the people at other libraries. So I think that's really important. So I do believe in investing that way. So I'm looking for places for my own staff to invest, for me to invest, and to, just to encourage and, rising waters raise all ships kind of thing. But I also believe very strongly that libraries should be accessible, and we can't just have a house of books or an archives that nobody can get into. There's like no point in having stuff if people can't use it. And there's no point in having a nice building if people aren't allowed to come in and be in your building. And so I am trying to create a space on my campus that's open, that people are comfortable in. But I think what we do with each other in our consortiums and like with BMRC and CCC is, create partnerships where, like Torsten was saying, where we're accessible. We have some unique items in our archives and in our collections that are hard for people to find. And I want people to be able to find them and learn from them. But I think getting to that point is going to take some work. And it isn't something that we can do on our own, because we can digitize all we want, but we're a tiny place. And so we need help doing that. I have one one archivist, special collections librarian, and she's amazing and she knows a lot about Chicago, but we just can't do it alone. So I'm really hoping to leverage some partnerships in the area. So
we are too. Robin, over to you.
Yes, I agree with what's been said so far about the partnerships and what we can all gain from it. And just this event alone, I think, has been wonderful because, like Michelle said, Roosevelt, we're a tiny school, and here we are with Northwestern and University of Chicago, and that's sort of a wonderful experience to have in itself. And then, our online digital collections too, sharing with the world out there is unique. We also have this rich history, like Michelle said about her school, is that we have this rich history, like I mentioned about the labor unions and all of these really interesting collections. And our university archivist, her name's Laura Mills, she's fantastic. And so we want to and plan to contribute and be more involved in the Explore More collections and the BMRC. But we do have, limited time and limited dollars to contribute. But with the consortia, that's where the leverage comes in. That's where we can bolster one another and have these conversations about how we might share and what we can each do to be involved. So yeah, it's just being on this panel alone is really helpful to us.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Okay, Xuemao, bring us home.
Yeah, when I think about this question, I'm thinking about from the Northwestern's point of view, perhaps two fronts. One is how the Northwestern can learn from the consortium members to benefit the Northwestern's research and learning mission, right? There's so much of the collaborative resource we can learn from each other. Second part is giving back. For the institution like the Northwestern and the Torsten U of the C, in the big institution, big AR research library in the city, we have the responsibility to give back to the community and enhance this Chicago city cultural heritage profile and a unique identity. This is something as the member of the community, I feel strongly we have a responsibility. So I look forward to working with the community members. I'm still learning, like Michelle said, and we're new, but we are ready to contribute.
I'm excited. This has been wonderful. And I thank you all for these conversations. And I've got, let's see, I see Torsten is, I'm sorry, I'm looking at one of our questions, which is more of a comment, and Torsten is typing an answer, but Patty Piotrowski from University of Illinois Springfield says, bravo for stepping away. More leaders need to encourage staff to step away. More leaders need to follow what we encourage for our staff. Definitely, Patty. Yes, I totally agree. I've got another question that's our own question. What is one thing you wish others knew about your library? For CHM, I say the best kept secret is the research center.
For us, I would say is our library is open to the public. Everyone can come in and use it. But that doesn't seem to be the perception, but it's actually been this case for a while. And I mean, we still have some sort of smaller level barriers that maybe don't make it quite as easy to the wider community to come in. But we're working on sort of removing those. But even so, if you show up today or tomorrow, you can come in. You can even go and use our special collections. That's all open to everyone. And And it's something I think that we need to promote and make the community more aware of, in particular when it comes to unique collections that we have on the history of Chicago that will be really interesting beyond academia.
I love hearing that.
Well, like the Torsten said, and actually, Northwestern Library is also open to the public. And this is something, Alan, I'm a little pleased in a surprised way. I remember Johns Hopkins, when we were there, not quite open to the public. And so yeah, that's something. Another thing for the Northwestern, for those of you who know the Northwestern Library, we have the very much tradition about to be the leader in the digital field. In the early 80s, Northwestern was the originally inventor and creator for the first integrated library system known as the NOTAS. So Northwestern was the quiet leader to in that field. So that's something I actually try to remind myself, and when I joined Northwestern, and this is the tradition for the university and the libraries.
Absolutely. Robin or Michelle, any?
Yeah. So our library used to be the dining hall of a hotel. It's really beautiful. It's on the 10th floor. We have some books of what the auditorium building looked like, the Louis and Sullivan building, and what it looked like originally. So you can see the original dining hall and where the kitchen was. The kitchen now is classrooms that they built. I think it was in 2017 or 2018 they remodeled. But also we have a really unique collection called the Center for New Deal Studies. It has its own space. It's all about the New Deal and the Roosevelts, and we just have a really interesting collection there. Harold Washington went to Roosevelt as well, and right now it's temporarily housed there, but we have Harold Washington's office chair housed in the Center for New Deal Studies.
Oh.
It's kind of interesting. I saw it in there the other day.
That is awesome. Oh, Michelle?
It's so cool. I love like random library things. My library was not once a dining hall. You can eat in my library, but was not a dining hall. One of the things that I have found very interesting, being new to North Central and new to the area and learning, is that my archives, though small, is very mighty, and so has a wide range of stuff that I did not expect, including a collection from the Illinois Prairie Path group, which created a lot of the prairie preserves in DuPage County and Will County in this area. And so we have all of the papers of that group. And to me, that's very interesting. I'm originally from Texas, and we don't preserve green spaces the same way. And then I moved to Wyoming, and like everything's a green space. And so it's kind of surreal to like be in the middle of a suburban suburb and just have like wide open prairies is amazing to me. So that connection for me, because one of the preserves is right by my house, that connection that I see every day, and then knowing that that is in my archives is really nice. It's a nice touch point for me, and I like knowing that there's a lot of suburb history in our archives. So one of the things that we want to do is we're working to make our stuff, like I think I said, more accessible online, because we want those collections to get used. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing it's all about the use of, getting people in, making things available. I'm so in love with this conversation. We've just got time for one more question, I think. And I will ask, how does your organization use social media to create a presence online? I do the Chicago Collections Twitter account, so I have to say that the recent Musk buyout has me thinking about what we're going to do on Twitter, but But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can start. Sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
My library used to have a library cat. Her name was Lucy, and she was featured in a BuzzFeed article about library cats and pets that were on Instagram. So that was very exciting. Lucy is no longer allowed in the building. She has a real home across the street. But we do have, we mostly do Instagram at our library, and the archives is gonna, again, with trying to make it more accessible, going to start ramping up their presence. But we have thought a little bit about it. I'm not sure where to go with the new Twitter stuff. But we do about once a week, and it's usually some kind of DEI or like resource sharing.
Yeah, in the Northwestern, over my 2 months, I found out we are not quite active on the social media compared to my previous job, Cincinnati. We at the Cincinnati, the libraries was active on any of those platforms, particularly reach out to the students. So I have given some of the suggestions to my communication office. I want them to pick up. I want to see the library be more active in the social media. It's more so about reach out to the younger generation and the students. And the students, you all know, student does not look at the email very much, honestly. And the social media sometimes, even the newer social media platform is not even those Twitter or Facebook is the newer one. They are looking about the information. So my vision is why we just promote us into where the student going to be. So that's the thinking, at least at this moment.
Robin or Torsten, any final thoughts on that? And that's okay.
Well, maybe just sort of building on what was just said. So coming from the British Library, obviously our internet presence is very minimal because the British Library has 2 million followers on Twitter, and we haven't quite matched that yet. But it's also not a surprise because I think the British Library is largely perceived as a cultural destination. And so the social media activities there were much more on the exhibition than they were on the role as the research library. And that's, if you don't happen to have a cute cat, is a bit harder to get across. I think we probably at some point next year need to have a bit of a rethink of our social media focus, because we have in some areas sort of scaled back a little bit recently because there hasn't been the capacity, and it'll bring up the question, how do we move this forward? But we, as it happens, also had a discussion just a couple of days ago when a member of staff asked the question of, well, what are we doing about Twitter? And I quite strongly felt I wouldn't want us to move off Twitter at this point, partly because that's where many of our users are, but also it's actually very problematic when you think of where to go. For example, if you take Facebook, there's been a really interesting, and having lived in the UK at the time as a committed European, a very painful discussion on the impact that Facebook had on Brexit, and how maybe some of these social media entities tend to put profit before what we would probably regard as creating a civil environment that's sort of inclusive and good for a robust but civic type discussion. If you look at TikTok, which clearly would be a place where you want to be much more than what's now social media for old people like Facebook, then you will find that some of the algorithms that they use apparently, at least from some research I've sort of looked into a little bit, tend to make content that might not exactly reflect the political view in China a little bit less visible than some other content. So you will find some level of what I think really problematic influence on public discourse almost anywhere. And there's not just one, shall we just say, eccentric CEO that causes some problems. So I think the best thing that we can do, if we have the resource to do it, is go onto all these social media platforms, meet our students where they are, and raise some awareness on what's actually happening behind the scenes. and what the risks are. And that, to me, at least at the moment, strikes me as better than walking away, because if we walk away and they're still there, then they lose one voice that could maybe raise awareness to, wow, this is really exciting. It also has its downsides that they should be aware of.
I agree. One of the things that we formed through Chicago Collections Twitter is relationships with Chicago historians. So look for an announcement about Melanie Newport, who teaches at University of Connecticut. She's got a wonderful book coming out called This Is Not My Jail. And she's been a great supporter of Chicago Collections Consortium. She is a former BMRC fellow, and that was a relationship we formed online. So really grateful for that. Oh, I don't want tonight to end, but we all have to go home and tend to our families. So on behalf of Jeannie Long and Marcia Walker McWilliams, I really thank Robin Hofstetter, Torsten Reimer, Michelle Boule Smith, and Xuemao Wang. This has been a lovely, lovely evening, and I am so grateful for your participation, your thoughts. I'm so glad this is recorded. I was not able to take notes while I'm talking, so I'm going to go back and listen again and share your wonderful advice. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.